How well do you really know the people who can walk into your life without knocking? Most days, Harold Fletcher never bothered with questions like that. At 62, living in the quiet folds of Ripley, Surrey, he had arranged his life around comforting habits, rituals, really, that made the world feel predictable. Tea at 7. A gentle walk with Jasper at 9. Tinkering with his aging Ford Mondeo whenever the Sunday sun was kind. His world was small, steady, and, for the most part, still. He liked it that way. After 36 years as a railway inspector, simplicity felt earned. He had dealt with enough derailments, equipment failures, and midnight emergencies to last a lifetime. Retirement meant quiet. No surprises. No sharp turns. But that Sunday morning, the world decided to shift. The garage smelled of damp concrete and engine oil, familiar scents that didn't ask anything from him. Jasper slept by the door, whiskers twitching in some gentle dream. Harold lay on his back under the car, the Mondeo raised on jack stands, the cold metal belly above him like a steel sky. He'd been replacing a stubborn brake line, muttering to himself about rust and age, when his wrench slipped. His knuckles grazed something hard. He winced, expecting a bolt or bracket, but his fingers brushed a shape that didn't belong. Smooth plastic, sharp corners, a faint warmth that contradicted the cold morning. Harold paused. His heart didn't pound. Not yet, but it did stumble in its rhythm, like it had missed a step. He reached back. His fingertips touched it again. A small black rectangle, magnet mounted to the chassis. A red light blinking like a heartbeat. Blink. Pause. Blink. The world above the car carried on. Birds, distant traffic, someone mowing their lawn. But under here, everything narrowed to that soft pulse of red light. He froze, hand hovering. What on earth? The words barely left his mouth. It wasn't a car part. It wasn't anything he'd ever seen sold at the hardware shop in Woking. And whatever it wasn't cold. That was the strangest part. It felt used, active, recent, not old, dust-covered equipment. Something placed today, yesterday, minutes ago. A warmth crept across the back of Harold's neck. He pulled himself out from under the chassis, palms gritty, breath shallow. He sat up slowly, staring at the underside of his car as if it might blink back at him. A tracker. That word arrived like a whisper from the past. The kind of thing he'd expect in one of those crime shows Linda watched, not in a retired man's garage in Ripley. He looked around his driveway, then at the quiet lane beyond. Nothing moved. Nothing unusual. A cyclist rolled past, oblivious. A woman pushed a pram. Two boys chased each other with sticks. Normal life. Normal day. So why was there a tracker under his car? He wasn't a man who invited mystery. His most daring act in recent years had been switching from Earl Grey to Assam. His life had no edges sharp enough to attract danger. At least, that's what he told himself. He crouched again, reached beneath the car, and felt the device once more. Warm. Alive. Whoever had placed it hadn't done so by accident. Someone was watching him. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, but from confusion, a kind that felt like betrayal, the sort that punches slow and deep. Who would do such a thing? And more unsettling, who could? He stood and dusted his palms on his trousers, mind working through the short list of people who had been close enough to the Mondeo that week. Linda. Poor Linda, his neighbor, 74, and still baffled by her own toaster. She'd recently asked him why her TV didn't work, only for him to find out she had unplugged it herself. Lovely woman, bless her, but not someone who could plan a tracking device without accidentally gluing it to her own cardigan. The courier, a young man with a distracted look and a box of garden tools Harold barely remembered ordering. He'd placed the package by the shed, walked back to his van, and left. No reason to crawl under a pensioner's car. And then, Marcus, his godson, the only person Harold trusted enough to leave his garage open for. A 27-year-old with too much intelligence and not enough rest. Marcus had visited on Thursday, breezing in with that blend of charm and nervous energy that always reminded Harold of his late father, Harold's closest friend since childhood. Marcus had spent the afternoon helping him sort old railway files, drinking coffee, asking questions about the past, the way young people do when they're hunting meaning. He had laughed. He had hugged Harold before leaving. He had stood right next to the Mondeo. Harold exhaled slowly. No, Marcus had no reason. The boy owed him nothing but love, and he gave plenty of that. Harold had practically raised him after that terrible night on the A21 took Marcus's dad. He had paid for school uniforms, for football boots, for university textbooks. He had stayed up late, giving life advice the boy didn't even ask for. Marcus would never. But the warmth of the device didn't lie. Someone had placed it. Someone who knew him. Someone who had access. Harold pressed his palms to his thighs, grounding himself. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe it wasn't a tracker at all. Sure, it looked like one, and blinked like one, and felt like one. But maybe he pulled the device free. It came off too easily. No manufacturer label. No scratch. No dirt. Almost brand new. He turned it over in his hands, the red light blinking steadily. Blink. Blink. Watching. Waiting. A cold unease wormed through him. Not panic, but the start of something heavier. Something ancient, like the first ripple before a storm breaks across the horizon. He walked inside, Jasper trotting behind, sensing the shift in his owner's mood. Harold placed the device on the kitchen table and stared at it. Why him? Why now? He lived a life people forgot the moment they looked away. He didn't make enemies. He didn't borrow money. He didn't hold secrets. His breath caught. Well, not entirely. There were things he didn't talk about. Not because he was hiding anything, he told himself, but because some memories were too heavy to drag into the light. Things that happened long before Marcus was even born. Things that had shaped him. Still, no one knew about those moments. Not really. Not enough to track him. Or did they? The red light blinked faster, or maybe it only felt that way because his heartbeat matched it now. He imagined someone out there with a screen, watching a tiny dot labeled Harold Fletcher move across a map. Watching him walk Jasper. Watching him sleep. Watching him discover the device. That thought landed deep, unsettling in its quiet cruelty. Someone close enough to watch, but distant enough to hide. He touched the table, steadying himself. Easy, he whispered, unsure if he was speaking to Jasper or his own frayed nerves. He tried calling Marcus. No answer. Straight to voicemail. Then again, and again. Each ring sharpened the unease building in his chest. Harold sat down, hands clasped, gaze fixed on the blinking light. In a village where people still left doors unlocked, where neighbors traded surplus tomatoes and favors, this felt like a shadow slipping across the sun. A violation, a warning, a promise of something he couldn't name yet. And as the device blinked in the dim kitchen light, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why would someone track a harmless old man? And more importantly, why now? Before Harold made a single decision, before he even had the chance to understand the blinking device on his kitchen table, you already saw the truth he couldn't. You saw Marcus, not confident, not smiling, not the bright young man Harold believed he'd raised into a decent, steady adult. No, you saw him exactly as he was that night. Alone in his cramped second-floor flat in Reading, the curtains drawn tight, a single lamp flickering in the corner, his face hollow and exhausted in the weak light. His hair was unbrushed, his t-shirt wrinkled, his eyes swollen from nights of little sleep and too much fear. The phone in his trembling hands lit his face with cold, blue light. On the screen, a map, a moving icon, a label beneath it. Harold's car. The dot stayed still, parked at the house in Ripley. Marcus exhaled shakily. Please just stay home tonight, Uncle Harry, he whispered, voice cracking under its own weight. I just need 2 more days. Just until Friday. Please. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, smearing tears he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Another vibration rattled the phone, but not from the tracking app. An alert. A reminder he couldn't ignore. Deadline, 48 hours. Payment required. Collateral acceptable. He opened the message with a dread that had numbed into routine. Same bold red text. Same impossible demand. And beside him, on the table, lay the rest. A thick stack of letters, each one uglier than the last. Greyhound Securities. A name that looked harmless on paper, but behind it, London's quietest predators. Men who didn't shout. Men who didn't threaten loudly. Men who didn't need to. Their reputation did the talking. Marcus had made one mistake. One stupid, desperate, foolish mistake 4 months earlier. He'd taken a loan he thought he could outrun. A loan he thought he could pay back with freelance gigs, favors from friends, weekend overtime. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself it was manageable. He told himself he would never let Harold find out. Except overtime didn't come. Freelance work dried up. Interest multiplied like rot. And Greyhound Securities didn't like waiting. The first letter had been polite. The second, less so. By the fifth, the tone had sharpened into something that curled in the stomach. Then came a visit. 2 men in gray windbreakers standing outside his flat, faces unreadable, hands calm and empty. The kind of calm that confirmed there were far worse things they could be holding if they wanted to. They didn't threaten. Not exactly. They simply asked if he had assets, if he had family, if anyone depended on him. Then one of them glanced at a picture on Marcus's shelf, a framed photo of him and Harold fishing at Frensham Pond years ago. The man tapped the glass with a slow, thoughtful finger. "Shame," he'd said quietly. The older ones never see trouble coming. That moment had never left Marcus. Not for a second. So he'd done the only thing he could think of. Something stupid. Something wrong. Something he hated himself for even as he did it. He bought a tracker. Cheap, unregulated, barely legal, and attached it under Harold's Ford Mondeo while pretending to help with paperwork. Not to stalk him. Not to expose him. Not to hurt him. But to protect him. If Greyhound Securities came after Marcus, they could go after the people he loved. Harold was the closest, the softest target, the most valuable leverage. If he could see where Harold was at all times, he could redirect danger. He could keep Harold away from the quiet roads or isolated places where accidents could happen. He could intercept anything before it reached the old man. Just 2 days more. 48 hours and some miracle. That was all he needed. But miracles never come on schedule. Marcus stared at the map again. The pad hadn't moved. Not yet. "Please don't go anywhere, Uncle Harry," he whispered, gripping the phone like it was the last rope on a cliff. "Just stay home. Stay safe. I'm working on it. I swear I'm working on it." His voice broke. He shoved away the letters on the table, sending them fanning out across the floor. White envelopes with heavy shadows. Some stamped urgent. Some stamped final warning. All stamped with his mistakes. On the top envelope, as if placed intentionally, were the words, "Collateral required." He picked it up with shaking fingers and read the next lines again, as though hoping they might have changed. "We will accept repayment in full, or equivalent personal collateral. We do not negotiate after the deadline." 48 hours remaining. Marcus shut his eyes. He could still hear the man's voice from that visit, quiet, polite, chilling. "Family is a responsibility. Make sure yours doesn't pay for your decisions." Marcus forced himself to breathe. In, out, slow, controlled. Fake calm was better than none. He opened his laptop, scrolling through hopeless options. Quick loans with worse interest, fake jobs, gigs that paid pennies, online pleas he was too ashamed to write. Nothing worked. Nothing came close. His mind raced through darker possibilities. Selling things. Doing favors for people he shouldn't. Running. Hiding. But running didn't erase debt. Hiding didn't protect Harold. The map refreshed. The dot flickered. Harold was still home. That tiny mercy brought Marcus to his knees. He set the phone down gently on the carpet, as if sudden movement could jolt danger into reality. He pressed his palms together, a gesture halfway between prayer and surrender. "Just 2 days," he whispered, forehead touching the floor. "Please just give me 2 days. I can fix this. I can save him. I can." His voice faded into a fragile silence. You, the viewer, saw the truth Harold didn't. Marcus wasn't a villain. He wasn't a coward. He wasn't trying to betray the man who raised him. He was drowning, fast, and trying to hold Harold above the water even as the current dragged him under. But desperation has a way of twisting good intentions into something sharp and dangerous. And sometimes protecting someone means hurting them first. The map refreshed again. Harold's car, Stationary. Marcus let out a shaky breath, hugging his knees to his chest. 1 hour passed, then another. Every minute was a countdown. Every vibration from his phone felt like a verdict. On his wall, the cheap battery clock ticked steadily. 48 hours, 47 hours, 46 hours, each second slipping away like sand through cracked fingers. And as the screen glowed in the dark room, tracking a man who had no idea he was being watched for love and fear all tangled together, one question hung heavy in the air, a question Marcus couldn't outrun. What happens when the timer hits 0? I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blinking red light under the Mondeo, a tiny heartbeat that wasn't mine. By morning, I'd made a decision. The tracker was going somewhere it couldn't broadcast a thing. I slipped out to the shed behind the house, tucked the device into an old biscuit tin, and hid it behind a rusted lawn roller no one had touched in years. The tin wasn't airtight, but it was metal, and it felt like enough of a barrier to buy me time while I figured out what I was up against. I didn't drive the car, didn't leave the house, didn't tell a soul, but silence doesn't always bring peace. At 9:17 a.m., the phone rang. Marcus. My chest tightened the moment I saw his name. Yesterday, I might have picked up cheerfully. Today, my thumb hovered over the answer button just a little too long. When I finally picked up, his voice came through too quickly, too eager. Uncle Harry, everything okay? Your car hasn't moved. My stomach clenched. There was the first thread pulling at the edge of my nerves. I tried to keep my voice steady. Why are you asking about my car? There was the briefest pause. Not even a second, but just long enough for something inside me to twist. Oh, just checking you're all right, he said, voice shifting into a feigned casualness. Roads are icy. Didn't want you out driving. Concern. Too much concern. Concern that felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced it and hoped I wouldn't notice the cracks. I'm fine, I said. The Mondeo's in the garage. Another pause. This time longer. How long will it stay there? He asked. Not is it all right? Not everything working? Not a normal question a godson asks his aging uncle on a winter morning. How long will it stay there? My throat went dry. Not sure, I said. Before he could respond, I ended the call. It wasn't rude, just necessary. I stared at the phone long after the line went dead. My thoughts tangled together, suspicion circling like a dark cloud. Marcus was worried about something. That much was obvious, but it wasn't about ice on the roads. He was tracking the car. He noticed the lack of movement. He needed it to move. Why? And what would happen if it didn't? The day passed slowly, each hour stretched thin by unease. I tried reading. I tried cleaning. I tried distracting myself with old photos, old memories, old routines. But then afternoon rolled in, carrying a different kind of disturbance. It started quietly, a flicker, barely noticeable. I was at the dining table, finishing a cup of tea when the laptop on the sideboard gave a faint pop. The camera light flashed, a tiny green blink I almost missed. Just once. I frowned. The computer wasn't even open. The lid was lowered halfway, enough to put the system in sleep mode. No updates should trigger the camera. No apps should activate it. I approached slowly, the same way you approach a noise at night when you're not sure if you want the answer. Before I touched anything, the cursor jerked. Just a millimeter, barely visible. Then again, a sudden, unnatural twitch across the screen. I froze. My laptop had never done that. Not in 10 years of owning it. The screen brightened on its own as though someone had tapped the touchpad. A window opened, my file explorer, then closed just as fast. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Someone was inside my computer. Not a glitch. Not a delayed update. Not a misclick from a clumsy hand. Someone was looking, checking, searching, and not for viruses. For me. My breath grew tight in my chest. I reached forward to shut the lid when the cursor jerked again, this time dragging across the screen like a finger tracing a path. Enough, I muttered under my breath. The moment I closed the laptop, the room seemed to exhale with me. But the relief was thin, temporary, and felt more like a pause than an ending. Hackers exist everywhere. But hacking a pensioner's laptop in Surrey? What can anyone possibly want from me? Unless it wasn't just anyone. My mind jumped back, uninvited, to the tracker. The warmth, the deliberate placement, the timing. What else had someone touched? My car, my shed, my computer. What next? My phone, my house, my life. The questions swarmed like wasps. I moved the laptop to a drawer and unplugged it, but the tension stayed with me. I felt watched, not from outside, but from inside the walls, inside the circuits, inside the small details of my world I'd always taken for granted. I walked through the house with slow, measured steps, noticing things I wouldn't have noticed yesterday. A faint smudge near the upstairs banister. Had it been there before? A slightly crooked ornament on the mantelpiece. Had Jasper nudged it? Or had it been moved? Was I imagining this? Was fear distorting everything? Or was someone closer to me than I'd ever realized? My thoughts kept circling back to Marcus, unwilling to land, but unable to fly away either. His questions about the car, his sudden concern, his tightened voice when I mentioned the garage. And now, the digital intrusion, the flickering camera, the moving cursor. If someone had access to my laptop, they had access to more. Everything, really. My files, my emails, my routine, my guesswork about the tracker, even the layout of my home from the photos I'd stored. What else had Marcus touched? My phone. He had helped me update it last month. My Wi-Fi. He'd fixed it after a slow connection. My garage passcode. He knew the old one and helped me set the new digit. Piece by piece, the puzzle rearranged itself into something darker. Something with sharp edges I didn't want to admit were real. I wanted to dismiss these thoughts. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe fear was making me paranoid. But the truth was harder, crueler. Someone had stepped into the private corners of my life. Someone had watched me without my permission. Someone who knew enough to dig deeper. And the worst part? It wasn't the device in the shed. It wasn't the flickering camera. It wasn't even the cursor moving under an unseen hand. It was the gnawing certainty that whatever I'd just discovered was only the beginning. I sat down heavily, trying to calm the racing storm inside me. If Marcus had placed the tracker, if he was somehow involved, what else had he done? What else had he touched? And more importantly, what else was I missing? The sun dipped behind a row of terraced houses across the lane, the room dimming into quiet shadows that felt less like a blanket and more like a warning. Night was coming again, and with it, the questions that wouldn't let me rest. Who was watching me from behind the screen? Who wanted to know where I went? And what would they do now that the car had stopped moving? One truth rose above the noise, heavy and cold. Someone was already inside my life, and I was only just noticing the doors left open. The dread curled tight in my chest, and as I sat alone in the fading light, one haunting question whispered through the silence. What happens when the watcher decides to step out from behind the screen? By the next morning, the fear had settled into something heavier. Not the sharp panic of discovery, but a thick weight pressing on my chest. I knew the tracker wasn't an accident. I knew the computer wasn't glitching. Someone was moving through my world with intentions I couldn't read. I needed answers, and I needed someone I could trust. That list had grown painfully short. So I drove, not the Mondeo, but my old bicycle, a rattling relic I hadn't touched in years, to the only person who'd never once lied to me in the 3 decades I'd known him. Thomas Hale. We'd worked together during my railway inspector days. He was younger than me, sharper with technology, and blessed with the sort of patient mind that could dismantle digital puzzles the way other men solve crosswords. His workshop sat near the edge of Guilford, tucked behind a line of shops, smelling faintly of soldering irons and old circuit boards. When I rolled the bike up to his door, Thomas looked up from his desk with eyebrows raised. "Well, if it isn't Harold Fletcher in the flesh," he said. "Haven't seen you come in on 2 wheels since, good grief, the 90s. "I needed to be careful," I replied. The tone in my voice wiped the smile off his face. He didn't ask questions. He simply nodded and gestured for me to come inside. I placed my laptop on the bench. "I think someone's been inside it," I said quietly. Thomas sat down, pushed up his glasses, and got to work. He moved with the calm precision of someone who could find a single bent nail in a mile of track. While he ran diagnostics, He kept up a gentle commentary. Little hums, concerned grunts, the occasional muttered, "That shouldn't be there." Then he stopped, completely, hands frozen over the keyboard. "Harry," he said, voice lower than before. "When did someone last help you with your computer?" The word help felt sharp. "My godson," I answered. "Marcus. He changed some settings weeks ago." Thomas inhaled through his nose, slow and careful. "This isn't new. Whoever did this installed remote access software months ago. It's been running quietly in the background all this time." He clicked through windows I didn't recognize, each one opening a doorway into a crime I didn't want to believe. "They've seen your emails, your banking, your private folders, your camera, everything." I felt my pulse climb into my throat. "Are you sure?" I asked. Thomas turned the monitor toward me. A list of access logs scrolled across the screen, dates, times, remote IP addresses that weren't mine. Someone had slipped in and out like a ghost, watching, copying, collecting. "This wasn't random hacking," Thomas said. "This was personal." The words felt like a small blade turning slowly. Personal. The room dimmed around the edges as my thoughts tangled between loyalty and suspicion. Marcus had always been good with technology. He'd always offered to help me, always smiled as he fixed things I didn't understand. But the idea that he'd used those moments to invade my privacy, it didn't fit the boy I'd raised. It didn't fit the man he'd become. And yet, the evidence lay glowing on the screen in front of me. Thomas wasn't finished. "There's something else," he murmured, opening a folder he hadn't shown yet. "I found documents stored in a hidden directory. Someone didn't want you to see these." He double-clicked a file. A scanned contract filled the screen. A loan agreement, signed digitally, in my name, my signature, or something that looked painfully close, dragged across the bottom of the page. I leaned forward, blood draining from my face. "That's not mine." "I didn't think so," Thomas said gently. "The signature's been forged, sloppily in some places, but convincing enough if no one challenged it." My eyes skimmed the text. Loan amount, tens of thousands. Borrower, Harold Fletcher. Contact details, my address, my phone number, my email, all correct. Collateral, primary residence, 14 Millstone Cottage. My breath caught. "They used my house," I whispered. "My home as collateral." Thomas nodded, jaw tightening. "And the agreement was signed 2 weeks ago." 2 weeks. Marcus had visited me 2 weeks ago. Not for tea, not for paperwork, for access. The betrayal landed like a physical blow. Not sharp, but heavy, spreading through me slowly, crushing something I wasn't ready to let go of. But even as the truth presented itself, my mind refused to accept the simplest version of it. Marcus wasn't cruel. He wasn't greedy. He didn't have a malicious bone in his body. He was struggling. He was drowning. He was young and terrible at asking for help. And desperation turns good people into ghosts of themselves. Thomas clicked to the next page. Payment schedule, interest, penalties. The numbers climbed like a cliff face. "Harry," he said softly, "whoever did this is planning to take everything you own. They've set the stage for it. The moment the payment is missed, the lender can seize your property." My chest ached. Marcus. My Marcus. The boy I'd taken fishing, the boy I'd helped with homework, the boy who cried into my coat the day his father died. Had he really forged my signature? Had he really sold my cottage to buy himself time? Thomas watched me carefully. "Do you know anyone who might be desperate enough for this?" I closed my eyes. Yes, I did, but admitting it felt like tearing something sacred inside me. Marcus wasn't a villain, not in the way stories like to paint them. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't spiteful. Whatever he had done because he was scared, because he saw no other way, because he believed that survival meant crossing a line he never intended to cross. The tragedy wasn't that he betrayed me. The tragedy was that he'd been cornered into believing betrayal was the only path left. But even knowing that, the pain was real. A quiet, suffocating heartbreak that settled under my ribs and refused to move. Thomas shut the laptop gently, as though the machine itself had suffered a wound. "Harry," he said, "this isn't petty theft. This isn't a mistake. Someone is orchestrating something serious. And they're close to you. That's what makes it dangerous. I nodded, but the motion felt stiff, mechanical. What do I do? I asked. Thomas hesitated. First, you need to understand why. His eyes narrowed. People don't take risks like this without a reason. And that, ironically, was the only part of the nightmare that made any sense. Marcus had a reason. I just didn't know what it was. Not yet. The truth was out, but the motive was still buried in shadows. And as I walked out of Thomas's workshop with my laptop sealed in a protective bag, dread followed me like a second shadow. Someone had watched me. Someone had used my name. Someone had tried to take everything I owned. But the most frightening part wasn't what I'd uncovered. It was the one question that burned hotter and darker with every step I took. If Marcus did all this, what could possibly be chasing him? Have you ever met someone who scared you at first glance, only to offer the one truth that changes your entire world? That was the kind of morning I walked into, cold, still, too quiet for a village where routines usually hummed like clockwork. I'd gone out simply to clear my head, thinking the crisp air might help me make sense of the last 48 hours. It didn't. If anything, it only sharpened the sense that something unseen was circling closer. I just stepped out of the little village shop, juggling a newspaper and a loaf of bread, when I noticed a man standing across the road. Hood up, shoulders hunched, eyes darting. He wasn't pretending to look casual. He didn't have the skill for it. He was watching me, and not in the way a stranger glances at another passerby. His stare was deliberate. I slowed my steps. Jasper wasn't with me. I'd left him at home. That alone made the walk feel exposed. The man took a half step forward, then stopped again as if debating whether to snap a twig or stay silent. I kept walking. Not fast, just enough to show him I'd seen him. When I reached the curve in the pavement, he moved. He crossed the street in 3 brisk strides and stopped in front of me, close enough that I caught the faint smell of stale tobacco in his clothes. His voice came out in a low, tense whisper. "You're Harold Fletcher?" I tightened my grip on the loaf of bread of all things. Funny how fear makes you prepare to fight with whatever's in your hand. "And who?" I said, stepping back. "Might you be?" His eyes flicked over the quiet street. He pulled his hood lower. Then, surprisingly, he looked ashamed. "My name's Elliot." He swallowed. "I work for Greyhound Securities." I didn't react at first. The name meant nothing. But then the words settled. Securities, the kind that weren't really securities at all. The kind that showed up in the darkest corners of London. The kind connected to the tracker under my car, the spyware in my computer, the forged loan. My heart thudded once, too hard. "They're the people," he continued carefully, "your relative owes money to." "My what?" He rubbed his thumb against his fingertips, a nervous tick. He hadn't come here to intimidate me. That much I could feel now. His fear wasn't of me. It was of the consequences of standing here at all. "Marcus," he said quietly, "your nephew, godson, whatever he is to you." The lad's neck deep in trouble. The world around me seemed to still, the road, the trees, even the cold air. This was the confirmation I'd been dreading. But it felt different hearing it from a stranger. "What sort of trouble?" My voice barely held. Elliot hesitated. I could see the war in his expression, a man torn between orders and conscience. Greyhound gave him a loan. Fast cash. High interest, he said. He thought he could flip it into something. Didn't work. Now the debt's bigger. Much bigger. "Why come to me?" I asked, though dread had already formed its shape. He exhaled heavily, as if the truth weighed him down by the shoulders. "They're coming Friday to collect." He paused. "And if he can't pay, they'll take whatever collateral he put up." My chest tightened. "My cottage." I wasn't guessing. I knew it. He nodded, and the guilt in his face landed like a punch. "He used your name. Your papers." "I'm sorry." He glanced around again. "I shouldn't be telling you any of this." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The village seemed suddenly too small for news this large. I stood there with a stranger who had just unraveled the last remaining thread of my normal life. But it was the next thing he did that truly shook me. Elliot reached into his pocket, and I instinctively stepped back. "It's all right," he said quickly. "Not a weapon. Just this." He pulled out a folded slip of paper, worn like it had been handled too many times. "This is where he's hiding out," he whispered. "A flat in reading." Top floor, door on the left. I didn't take the paper immediately. Not because I didn't want it, because I couldn't understand why he was offering it. He seemed to read my confusion. I've worked for Greyhound 3 years, he murmured, voice barely audible. Most days I tell myself it's just a job. You knock, you warn, you leave. But the lad, he's young. Stupid, sure. But he's not wicked. His eyes lifted to mine. I saw him last night. He was shaking like a leaf. Could barely speak. He kept saying he didn't want to drag you into this. That he was buying time. That if he could stall until Friday evening, he'd sort something. Something inside me twisted. Because the tracker, the remote access, the forged loan, they weren't tools of malice. They were tools of survival. Elliot continued, raising his voice slightly, a whisper stretched thin. I'm not supposed to warn families. It's against the rules. But I couldn't watch him go under without giving you a chance. He's drowning, Mr. Fletcher. Proper drowning. And when people panic, they grab the closest thing, even if it's the person they love. He pressed the note into my hand, then stepped back quickly, as though proximity itself posed a risk. You've got until Friday morning at the latest, he said. After that, I can't guarantee anything. I felt the weight of the folded paper. It was surprisingly heavy, considering its size. Maybe because it held the truth I'd been stumbling toward without wanting to find. Elliot adjusted his hood and started walking away. But after a few steps, he turned back. For what it's worth, he said, the lad talks about you like you're the only solid thing he's ever had. Then he left, vanishing down the side path between the post office and the butcher's, swallowed by the gray of the morning. I stood alone on the pavement, bread under my arm, newspaper crushed in my hand, and in my other palm, an address that felt like the beginning of the end. The fear I'd been carrying shifted into something sharper. Not anger, not betrayal, a kind of sorrow that sits deep in the ribs, because the villain in this story wasn't a monster lurking in the shadows. It was desperation, a boy trying to outrun a debt with no finish line, a child I'd raised who had reached for me, not to hurt me, but because he thought I was the only branch strong enough to hold him. The tracker, the forged papers, the hacked laptop, every violation suddenly changed shape. He hadn't been trying to take my life. He'd been trying to stop his from collapsing. And that truth, delivered by a debt collector with a guilty conscience, shifted the entire ground beneath my feet. But another truth followed close behind, whispering a cold warning. If Marcus was desperate enough to risk everything, just how far would Greyhound go when the deadline hit? Friday was closing in, a countdown neither of us could outrun. And now the real question rose like a shadow behind me. If Marcus wasn't the villain, then who was? Have you ever walked into a room and felt, before you even crossed the threshold, that something inside it was about to break you? That was the feeling I carried with me as I stood outside the top floor flat in reading, the one written on Elliot's slip of paper. The hallway was narrow, stale with cigarette smoke, and the light above the door flickered like it, too, had given up. I knocked once. The sound echoed down the corridor, hollow and accusing. Inside, something shuffled. A pause. Then the door opened only a crack, just wide enough for one frightened eye. Uncle Harry. Marcus pulled the door fully open, but he didn't step aside right away. It was as if he knew what step 2 would bring. Confrontation. Truth. The collapse of whatever lies he'd been balancing. When I finally walked past into the flat, the smell hit me first. Old takeaway containers, damp clothes, unwashed blankets. The second thing that hit me was worse. It looked like someone had shaken the entire contents of his life out across the floor. Letters everywhere. Stacks on the sofa. More on the kitchen counter. Red stamps. Final notice. Outstanding balance. Immediate action required. A few envelopes were torn open so violently the paper inside had ripped. And then the ones with the Greyhound Securities logo. Heavy paper. Black ink. Threats disguised as formal communication. Something inside me hollowed out. Marcus closed the door behind us with the softest click, like he was afraid a louder sound might set off an explosion. His face. He looked nothing like the boy I'd raised. His eyes were ringed with exhaustion. His hair unwashed. His hands trembling even though he shoved them deep into his jeans pockets. "Uncle Harry," he said again, voice cracking around the edges. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer immediately. I reached into my coat and held up the small, black device. The tracker. Its red light blinked once, as if mocking the moment. "Why?" I asked. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. That single word was heavy enough. Marcus stared at the device, and whatever fragile defense he'd been holding, whatever story he was preparing, fell apart before it even formed. His shoulders sagged. His chin dipped. He looked smaller, like shame had compressed him. He walked to the sofa, sat down, and covered his face with both hands. "Uncle Harry," his voice broke fully now. I'm so sorry." He shook as he spoke, as though the confession itself hurt. "I owed 20,000. It was supposed to be temporary, just to get me through the layoffs. I thought I could pay it off before the interest kicked in." He looked up at me, eyes red. But it grew. 20 turned into 60 before I even knew what happened. I stayed silent. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Then it became 100, he whispered. "And Greyhound doesn't do payment plans. They want everything. Immediately. Or they could take something of equal value." He wiped his nose on the back of his sleeve, embarrassed by the gesture. "They said the only collateral big enough was your cottage." He said the words like they were made of broken glass. My cottage. The place I'd lived for 40 years. The place he'd spent summers chasing Jasper through the garden. The place he learned to ride a bike, to read, to fix things with me in the shed. And he'd offered it to criminals as payment for his mistake. But the ache that spread through me wasn't anger. It was something heavier, something that tightened my ribs. Betrayal is painful, but realizing someone you love felt so alone they couldn't come to you, that's worse. Marcus pressed both hands to his face again, pulling at his hair. "I didn't know what else to do," he said, voice muffled. "They were calling nonstop, showing up, waiting outside my work. I panicked. I thought if I just used your name, just temporarily, I could stall them long enough to fix everything." He sucked in a shaky breath. "And the tracker? I only put it on your car because I needed to make sure you weren't out. If the car moved, they'd think you were running. They'd come early. I thought if you stayed home, no one would get hurt." I swallowed hard. "Then why the computer?" I whispered. He looked sick. "I needed your financial statements. To show them proof you had the assets. I wasn't going to actually let them take the house. I just needed 2 more days. 2 days to find a loan or a buyer or something. Anything." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gripping his hair like he wanted to tear it out. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, voice trembling so hard I barely recognized it. "I was trying to save myself, and I nearly destroyed you. I was so scared, Uncle Harry. So bloody scared." The room felt smaller now, the walls closer. His words didn't echo, they sank. Deep, painfully deep. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung between us. The lies, the fear, the desperation, the years of trust cracked open like an old floorboard. I looked at him. This man, who'd once asked me to tie his shoelaces, who used to fall asleep on my sofa with one hand and a packet of crisps. And now he was shaking in front of me, drowning in a sea he'd stepped into by mistake, too embarrassed or terrified to call for help. My lowest moment wasn't discovering what he'd done. It wasn't even realizing how close I'd come to losing everything. It was standing in that dim, ruined flat, looking at the boy I'd raised, and realizing he hadn't trusted me enough to say 4 simple words. "I need your help." The silence stretched. He kept crying quietly, shoulders moving. I felt my own throat burn. Finally, Marcus whispered, almost too softly to hear, "What do we do now?" I didn't have an answer. For the first time in my life, I genuinely didn't know. And that, standing in that cramped, broken flat with a boy who thought he'd run out of choices, was the lowest point I'd ever reached. Neither of us knew what came next. Only that Friday was creeping closer. And Greyhound Securities wasn't known for mercy. Have you ever felt a moment shift? Like the entire story is leaning toward one ending, and then someone quietly chooses another path, rewriting everything? That's what happened in that cramped flat in reading. One breath, one decision, and the course of our lives tilted. Marcus sat slumped on the sofa, eyes swollen, guilt wrapped around him like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. His confession still hung in the air, raw and painful. I could feel his fear vibrating through the silence. Anyone else might have called the police, or walked out, or shouted, broken and betrayed. But instead, I sat next to him, close, quiet, certain. "We fix this together," I said. He blinked at me, stunned, then broke again, this time not from fear, but from relief so sharp it nearly buckled him. He'd expected rage, maybe even abandonment. What he hadn't expected was a hand extended in the darkest moment of his life. He cried harder, shoulders shaking, breath hitching like a child. And I let him, because sometimes the only way to rise is to first fall apart. When he finally managed to breathe again, we began. The shift was subtle at first, just the flicker of determination returning to Marcus's eyes, a lift in his posture, a decision to try. But I felt it, a spark of the boy he used to be. That evening, I called Thomas. "We're coming over," I said. "Bring your tools." He didn't ask why. Thomas always understood more than he let on. The evidence hunt begins. Thomas lived in a small semi-detached house in Woking, the kind with mismatched mugs and 3 different types of biscuits he kept for visitors. He opened the door before we reached it, eyeing Marcus with a mix of concern and quiet understanding. Inside, he cleared his dining table with one sweep of his arm. "Lay everything out," he said. What followed felt like building a case with shaking hands and borrowed time. Bank letters, loan statements, threats from Greyhound Securities, the contract with my forged signature so precise it made my skin crawl, emails with veiled threats, screenshots of messages, spyware logs Thomas had pulled from my laptop earlier, each one a timestamp violation of my privacy. It was all there, hundreds of small wounds adding up to a single truth. Marcus wasn't innocent, but he was trapped. Thomas moved with methodical precision, scanning, sorting, photographing. "This," he said at one point, holding up the spyware report, "is enough for a cybercrime charge alone." Marcus winced. "And this," Thomas added, tapping the forged loan agreement, "could put Greyhound under serious investigation." "Could," I said quietly. "But I need Will." Thomas paused, meeting my eyes. "You're calling her, aren't you?" I nodded. "Detective Eliza Ward. A name from another life. Railway fraud, a years-old investigation, a few shared cups of terrible station coffee. A woman who didn't tolerate bullies." I stepped into Thomas's garden to make the call. The night air was cold, the kind that clears your lungs and steadies your thoughts. She answered on the second ring. "Harry? Haven't heard from you in ages." "Good to hear your voice, too," I said, though mine shook. "Eliza, I need protection for tomorrow morning, and I'm bringing you a case of loan shark fraud, extortion, cyber intrusion, and a forged collateral agreement." She didn't ask for details, didn't lecture me about calling late, didn't hesitate. "Bring everything to Guildford Station at 9 a.m., she said. "I'll have a team ready." The line clicked. The air felt different, charged. I went back inside. Marcus looked up from the mess of papers. "Who was that?" "A friend," I said. "And her best chance." Walking into the storm. The next morning, the sky over Surrey was pale and cold, the kind of winter light that made everything look sharper. Marcus stood beside me outside the Guildford Station doors, clutching a folder Thomas had organized. He was trembling, not just from fear of the loan sharks, but from the weight of facing everything he'd done. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "Yes," I said, steady, certain. "You do, and you're not doing it alone." We walked through the automatic doors together. A team of officers waited at the far end of the concourse, gathered around Eliza Ward, short, sharp-eyed, and already surveying us like she saw more than we said. "Harry," she said, striding toward us. "Let's get to work." We spent 2 hours in interview room 3. Marcus gave a statement, hesitant at first, then stronger. Thomas laid out the digital evidence. I provided the timeline. Eliza took notes with decisive movements, each stroke of her pen another nail in Greyhound's coffin. At one point, she looked up at Marcus. "You understand," she said, "what you did is illegal." He nodded, ashamed. "But," she added, "what they did is monstrous." Something faint flickered in Marcus's expression. Hope. Greyhound Securities never saw it coming. By noon, officers were already executing warrants in London. 3 collectors, men who'd been intimidating Marcus for weeks, who'd threatened my home, who thought they were untouchable, found themselves pinned to squad cars, shouting complaints no one believed. The officers moved like a tide, swift and coordinated. Greyhound's small reading office was shut down by midday. Computers seized. Documents confiscated. Phone records pulled. Their operation peeled open like a rotten fruit. Eliza called us in the station's cafeteria around 1 o'clock. "Harry," she said, "3 collectors are in custody. We have more warrants coming. The director of Greyhound will be questioned within 48 hours. Marcus's hand shook so badly I had to steady his coffee cup. "That means," he whispered, "your debt is frozen pending investigation," Eliza said, "and the forged collateral is void." I felt my breath leave me in a long, quiet exhale. My cottage was safe, but more importantly, so was he. Marcus buried his face in his hands again, but this time it wasn't shame or despair. It was something softer, something like gratitude, mixed with disbelief. "Uncle Harry," he murmured, voice cracking, "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," I said gently, "but you're going to earn it." He nodded. For the first time in months, he looked like someone who finally believed he had a future. The rise begins. We walked out of the station together later that afternoon. Him still trembling, me steady, both of us changed. People expected a story like this to end with punishment, division, or some grim final blow. Instead, we rewrote it. Not through vengeance, not through throwing Marcus to the wolves, but through something far harder, standing with him when he'd fallen and fighting side by side. Greyhound Securities had never seen it coming, and neither had Marcus. His rise was only just beginning. Have you ever wondered what comes after a storm has passed? Not the immediate relief, not the adrenaline rush of survival, but the slow, quiet reshaping of life itself. That was the feeling in Ripley 2 months later. The village hadn't changed. Its quiet streets and hedgerows looked the same, but the world as I knew it had shifted in ways far deeper than anyone could see. The prosecution of Greyhound Securities was underway. News bulletins in London reported the arrests and charges, but what mattered most to me wasn't the headlines. It was the unraveling of the operation that had nearly destroyed Marcus, my home, and the life we'd built together. Through meticulous investigation, Detective Eliza Ward's team had pieced together the full scope of the fraud. The office in Reading was emptied of files, digital records seized and analyzed. Every forged document, every threat, every manipulated bank transaction was cataloged and entered into the case. I attended a few hearings, more for Marcus's sake than mine. He was nervous at first, pale and restless, fidgeting in the witness seat. But as each piece of evidence was presented, each fraudulent action laid bare, he began to understand the scale of what had been done to him and how narrowly we'd avoided disaster. He wasn't just facing punishment, he was witnessing justice, and the clarity of truth had a healing effect, even if it was slow. Greyhound's collapse was absolute. Their office closed, their phone lines dead, their collectors either in custody or scattered. The relief was tangible, like a tide receding to reveal a clean shore. Marcus's recovery wasn't just about avoiding the predators. It was about rebuilding himself. With Eliza's guidance and Thomas's quiet support, he entered repayment programs to manage the debt he had accrued, as well as counseling to confront the fear, shame, and panic that had driven his desperate actions. At first, he resisted the idea of therapy, embarrassed by the thought of someone probing the reasons behind his panic. But as the weeks passed, he learned to speak honestly about the pressure he had felt, the loneliness, and the terror that had made him reach for a solution so reckless it could have destroyed everything he loved. Each session left him exhausted, emotionally raw, but also lighter, a little more human each time. As for me, I learned to forgive, not instantly, not fully at first, but enough to see Marcus as the frightened, desperate man he had been rather than the betrayer I had feared. Forgiveness wasn't an erasure of his mistakes. It was a recognition that he had acted out of panic, not malice, and that he had taken responsibility when confronted with the truth. Each Sunday, when he came to visit, I saw progress. The slump of guilt slowly lifted from his shoulders, replaced by tentative pride in small accomplishments. Bank statements balanced, emails responded to on time, a genuine smile emerging when Jasper bounded to greet him. Our Sundays became rituals of quiet rebuilding. Tea at 7, as I had always done. Jasper bounding at our feet, a tether to normalcy. Conversations that began with practicalities, groceries, chores, minor village gossip, gradually deepened into reflections on mistakes, growth, and understanding. Marcus never shied from mentioning the tracker, though it was now safely mounted on a shelf in the garden shed, a reminder rather than a threat. He would sometimes nod toward it and whisper, voice small and full of regret, "I still wish I could undo it." And I would answer as I always did, "You did wrong, but you also faced it. That matters more." It was a simple line, but it carried the weight of months of fear, betrayal, and near loss. It was a line that reminded us both that choices could lead to destruction, but they could also lead to redemption if courage and honesty followed. We sipped our tea, warm mugs cradled in our hands, and allowed silence to fill the space between us. These moments weren't dramatic. They weren't punctuated by sudden revelations. They were quiet, human, and essential. Every shared sip, every small laugh at Jasper's antics, every cautious discussion of his progress stitched the ragged edges of trust back together. Marcus began to speak more openly, telling me about his counseling sessions, what he learned about his panic responses, how fear had twisted his thinking. I listened, sometimes offering advice, more often simply hearing him, letting him know his voice mattered. He began to show signs of true accountability, not out of fear of consequence, but because he understood the impact of his actions. He rebuilt not just the financial stability of his life, but the moral compass he had temporarily lost to panic. Watching him grow into someone capable of facing mistakes and making amends became its own quiet triumph. We laughed again, slowly, cautiously, at things that didn't matter. A burnt scone, Jasper chasing his tail, the absurdity of the village's pigeon population. These little moments were sacred. They reminded us both that life wasn't just about mistakes, debts, or trackers hidden under cars. It was about presence, care, and the daily work of showing up for each other, unbroken by fear. The tracker on the shed shelf became a symbol rather than a weapon. Each time I glanced at it, I felt the pulse of the months behind us, fear, betrayal, desperation. But I also felt the power of our choice. We could have let it destroy us. We could have let vengeance guide our actions. Instead, we chose truth, action, and solidarity. The tracker's blinking light was a monument to the moment when fear became the teacher rather than the enemy. One evening, Marcus and I sat by the garden shed, the air crisp with early winter chill, Jasper curled at our feet. He looked at the shelf, eyes soft, and spoke. "I still can't believe how close we came to losing everything." I nodded. "I know, but look at us now. We're still here, and we're better for it." He turned toward me, eyes searching for absolution, for permission to let go of his guilt. "You forgive me, don't you?" he asked quietly. I leaned back, sipping my tea, letting the warmth settle in. "I do. Not because everything is okay, not because what you did was harmless, but because you faced it and because you're learning from it. That's what matters." He nodded, and for the first time, I saw his shoulders lift with a measure of relief. A boy who had once panicked, a man who had nearly been crushed by his own choices, now stood in the small light of redemption. We didn't celebrate with fanfare. There was no grand gesture, no parade. Just two men, tea in hand, rebuilding a bond stronger for having been tested, and Jasper reminding us that life, in its gentlest moments, could be whole again. Sometimes revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes revenge isn't the shattering of lives or the settling of scores. Sometimes the most powerful act is the refusal to continue a cycle of fear and pain. Choosing truth over deceit, facing wrongdoing with courage, and allowing forgiveness to flow, not as a favor, but as a recognition of growth, can rewrite a story far more effectively than retaliation ever could. Marcus was learning this, and I was learning it alongside him. We were no longer bound by fear or guilt. We were bound by choice. By the time the village lights flickered on in Ripley, casting warm orange pools onto the damp streets, we had rebuilt something stronger than a house, stronger than a financial ledger, stronger than the shattered remains of our trust. We had rebuilt a family, not because of blood alone, but because of truth, courage, and the quiet, unspoken decision to rise together. Even the tracker now sat on its shelf silently, a small, blinking reminder of how far we had come. Not a weapon, not a threat, a symbol. And as I watched Marcus sip his tea, quiet but present, I understood fully. The ending we expected, the destruction, the loss, the retribution, was never the ending we deserved. Instead, the ending was gentler, human, honest, and sometimes that's all that matters. Don't forget, if this story resonated with you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to VengeTalesDiary for more gripping stories of betrayal, redemption, and the quiet power of choosing purpose over revenge.